So, Mike, I have a cup of coffee with me, as normal at this point, from a local coffee bean roaster that I discovered is quite literally just under 1 mile from my house.
Whoa.
And I was quizzing the guy because we ran across his website and I had never seen him before. I was like, how on earth is there a coffee roaster in our town and I'm not aware of this? How do I not know this? And then I go talk to him and like there's not even a storefront. Like I opened the front door to this place to come pick up my coffee and I walk into one of their offices. I'm like, oh, did I come in the wrong door? And he immediately greets me and welcomes me and gives me a tour of the place and tells me he's been there for 20 years. I'm like, what? Okay, somebody explain, start talking. Turns out he's been doing wholesale up until about 3 months ago only. So he didn't have a website. He didn't do retail stuff like that. So I don't feel so bad.
So you're going to make him a website and he's going to give you free coffee for life?
His son went to college for internet marketing. I didn't know you could get a degree in that, but he did. And so his son put it together for him. That's how I learned of it. But I made sure to, like I do with all businesses like this, that I interact with their website. I simply mention, oh, if you ever need a web developer, by the way. Yeah, I do that a lot.
I've gotten so much free coffee that way. So what's the name of the roaster? Let's give him a shout out.
Oh, Cafe Strata is the name of the stuff.
Right. I've never heard of them.
I had not either. Customroasting.net, I think is what it is. I'm looking it up quick. Yes, customroasting.net. There you go. Shout out to my dude here close by. Hey, dude.
Nice.
Fun times. So I have something I want to bring up from a couple times ago.
Okay.
It's number one on the list here. Because you rated this book at a 5. And a friend of mine who I recorded a podcast with him. As we record this one, that one will theoretically be live. So you might hear us roast you on that a little bit. Sorry about that. But he brought up the 10X rule has a lot of swearing in it. And that's something that's typically been a downside for you whenever we read these books. It's not something that usually catches me off guard. I'm not sure if that's because of the farm background and just being around it a lot. But it came up when I was talking to my buddy Josh, and he wanted to know why swearing was okay in that book, and you still gave it a 5 despite of it. And I'm curious too. Ready, set, go.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I guess it's the way that it was used. And that maybe doesn't impact the rating that I would give it necessarily, but I guess I was able to look past it a lot because I knew going in I wasn't going to like Grant Cardone. I even said that on the podcast. Like, I don't think he and I would be friends. He seems a little bit
so
Gary V-ish. I'll just leave it like that.
So you're looking past his style. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Whereas there are a lot of other books that we've read, maybe not even for the podcast, but other books that I've read where I'll just absolutely love a book and then they'll drop in an F-bomb and I'll be like, why did you do that? So I guess like that's kind of my justification, is that I knew what to expect going into the 10X rule. And I apologize to people who are listening and maybe they didn't know what to expect and that caught them off guard. I could totally see that happening, but I guess just trying to, reconcile it in my own head. Like that's, I think, what happened and why I was not okay with it. That's the wrong term, but able to look past it maybe for the 10X rule.
I think you squirmed your way out of that. The one way I'm not sure how to counter you with it, but that's okay.
Well, I mean, I definitely don't condone it. And I just think that there's a lot of value there, which it didn't detract from. Like I said, if you're going to get a lot out of the 10X rule, you're going to get a lot out of it despite Grant Cardone, I would say, in his little bit edgy, rough style. Mm-hmm. Whereas I forget what other book had that. Was it Daring Greatly, where I had an issue with that.
Yeah, yep, because Brene Brown is a
Yeah,
Texan.
Brene sounds like someone that I'd love to go get coffee with. And so when she did it, right, it was a woman who wrote that book. Because I think I messed that up the first time.
Yes, female.
Yeah, it just like was out of left field for me in that book. And I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the best thing I can do is compare Grant Cardone to Gary Vaynerchuk, because people in our space, I think, are probably familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk. And even if they don't like him, because I think almost everybody in our space doesn't like him, but they respect him. Like what he teaches and what he, like you go to one of his talks, everybody who I know has like consumed his content or heard him speak or whatever, like it's really, really good stuff. It's, they'll use the term life-changing, but doesn't mean that I like him either.
Yeah, I think expectations are a lot with a book, which is interesting if you start, like, if you're reading a book every 2 weeks or every week, if you're reading between as well, like what we are, it seems like the preconceived notions of what you're going to get into make a big difference. This is why I advocate for reading introductions so much, because some people like to skip those, but I feel like those are important, the introductions, just because they lay the groundwork for what you're getting ready to get into. Like they adjust your expectations to what the rest of the book is going to be like, and to me that's really important. So I guess if you're looking at the 10x rule and you know there's going to be swearing in it, and you know that Grant Cardone is of that style, I could see where it just doesn't even cross your mind. But if you're not expecting it at all, it would be jarring. I could see that.
Yeah, so probably should have called that out, I guess. But yeah.
No, that's fair. That's fair. I know that Grant seems to be very motivated, and he seems to use swearing to help with that. So, anyway, thought it was interesting. Another thing I want to pick on you about, this might start out as a pick on Mike show. Sorry about that. I saw a tweet by you about transitioning to do versus OmniFocus. I'm going to bring this up again. So, Are you doing this? If so,
I am still playing around with To Do, but I am not going to transfer everything. Matt basically talked me out of it on the episode of the Productivity Show where we talked about it. Because I was like, oh man, Matt, these features are awesome. Maybe I should switch over. And he's like, well, actually, Mike, OmniFocus is coming out with the same features, so maybe you don't have to.
Yeah.
But I was very, very impressed with To Do and how Matt was using it. One feature he called out specifically, which I don't know why I never thought about this, but To Do has this feature where you can use the different priority levels. And I mentioned on the episode that I hate the definition of different priority levels, because either things are a priority or they're not. Mm-hmm. And he said that he's using them to define energy levels. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense, because I've tried to hack my way, different perspectives or context for that in OmniFocus in the past. I currently don't even use a low energy level context anymore, because it just wasn't something that I could really get my mind to think that way very effectively. But when it's part of the interface, and that's the cool thing about To Do, in my opinion, is that the interface is packed, but once you get used to the interface and you know where the things are, it actually gives you a ton of information. And it can actually be easier to use because you have all of that visual instead of having to drill down and find that sort of thing.
Are you subscribed to, there is a newsletter that David Allen puts out on GTD Times. Do you get this?
I believe I do, but I don't read very many newsletters.
Okay. He sent it out. It's one of the few that I try to keep up on, just because it's kind of nice to get, straight from the horse's mouth what's going on with GTD. I kind of just like having that little motivation that happens occasionally. Anyway, he sent out a newsletter, it's probably been about a week ago as we record this, that basically said that you should get rid of your today list. Like, don't put together a list for today. What? That made me stop and think a little bit. And he had a pretty good rationale for it, because it had more to do with, if you do create a today list, or like in my case, it would be the dashboard that I'm kind of known for on OmniFocus. That's exactly what that is. And it's essentially, if you're in OmniFocus, anything flagged or due today. That's what that is. David Allen was saying that if you do that, it dilutes the other contexts that you have, and you end up working from today lists as opposed to your contexts. That really kind of struck a chord with me. So I'm experimenting right now without my dashboard, which I'm going to say the first couple of days wreaked havoc on me. I'm so used to my dashboard. But it's such an interesting experiment. Anyway, I bring it up because it's fun to see what David Allen says as far as kind of the nuanced side of GTD and how that can play into certain apps and programs and, even analog tools. It's fun to see how he's still experimenting with all of those things.
Yeah, I don't want to sound negative, but I will. I stopped listening to David Allen's opinion on technology when he appeared on Mac Power Users and told everyone that he was using eProductivity, which I just pasted in the chat. Yep. Take a look at that application. And
I know, I've seen this thing.
Oh my gosh, he must be getting a kickback or something. I mean, his picture's on the homepage, but
right.
How in the world do you recommend something like this over something like OmniFocus or any of the other applications that are out there? So I've kind of come to this place where David Allen and I had a little bit of a falling out in my head where like I really embraced getting things done and it was transformational. And then from that point, basically I realized all of the problems with GTD. The honeymoon was over. He recommended this app and I was just like, what? And then I kind of had to reconcile in my head, like, what are the good things from GTD that I can apply? And what are the things that I'm okay with not listening to David Allen for?
Yeah.
Like the tickler file is another one. I don't have a tickler file where like I have 31 folders and I'm going to put the thing that I need to do next month on the 15th in the folder for the 15th. Like that just makes no sense. So I've kind of reconciled this in my head where like the flow chart out of GTD is absolutely awesome. I'm going to apply that every single way that I can. And I've even actually adapted that a little bit in terms of how I work because I've kind of identified different branches and things that things might take. Like if it's a task, it's not necessarily going to go into the task manager. It might end up on my calendar depending on the type of task. So I've fleshed that out a little bit more in my own head and kind of made my own Mike TD. I don't know.
MTD.
Yeah. But there's a lot of good there. So I don't know. I guess that's like the long version of saying that I kind of viewed David Allen as like my productivity hero in a sense. And then it's kind of like you find out that your favorite basketball player actually likes a music group that you can't stand or something like that. It's just like, oh, don't have as much in common as I thought we did.
Right.
That's kind of where we're at.
See, I tend with stuff like this, I tend to abstract the technical recommendation from the mindset. So in this case, like, yes, he uses eProductivity. Looks like a nightmare to me. But you also have to keep in mind that they use Lotus Notes on the back end. And if you use Lotus Notes, from a functional standpoint, eProductivity, I think, makes sense. But if you can get away from Lotus Notes, which I'm not really sure why people get into Lotus Notes. I hesitate to say that out loud. Anyway, there you go. So I don't know why people use Lotus Notes. Say it louder. If you do, I could see where you use that, but I don't get it. I don't understand it. So that doesn't follow me. However, I know that if I follow or pay attention to how that software functionally operates and the intent behind it, that I can do a lot of the same things, even more so in other areas. Like you can do the tickler file thing. Like I get that. But for me, I tend to do that via calendar. Like I've got a tickler calendar in my application for that, so that if something comes up, like for example, I'm considering and likely going to go to the Minneapolis Ignite deal here. When is that? May sometime? I'm likely going to go to that, but I don't know for certain. So I've gone ahead and calendared it under my tickler calendar, and then I'm always reviewing a couple months out once a week just to see what's coming up, and that's how I trigger that stuff. Anyway, that's just the concept that I'm pulling out from that. I'm not necessarily following it to the letter in the way that it's recommended, but I'm following the mental state that comes with it.
That makes sense. One other thing about GTD, David Allen has built a brand and a business for, what is it, like 20 years now?
I think
Off
longer
of
than that. Yeah.
one simple flow chart, essentially.
Yep.
It is amazing how much mileage he has gotten out of that.
Yep.
Even the
true.
updated version of the book, like we talked about as the very first episode we did on Bookworm.
Right.
I was looking forward to it because I'm like, yeah, it's going to be updated. He's not going to talk about Palm Pilots anymore. And instead, he just got rid of all of the tech stuff, which, I get it. And it makes it more evergreen.
Right.
But yeah, like I want to know how he's implementing these different tools, but also I guess if he's still on e-productivity, maybe I don't want to know how he's implementing these tools. So yeah, play to your strengths. Good job, David.
Yep. Anyway, I have a hard time arguing with GTD just because I feel like I've studied neuroscience enough and I pay attention to my own mindsets in a way that I have a hard time arguing with it. Not necessarily the tech, like I can argue the technicalities. I don't need file folders. Like I can argue that day in and day out, but I can't argue the mindsets that are behind those recommendations. That's what I found. And because of that, that's why I tend to listen to him still. And whenever he says things like, don't use a today list, I'm like, why? Start talking. I'll put a link to that newsletter. There's a public version of that. So I'll put a link to that specific one in the show notes. That way other people can get it.
Put a link to e-productivity too, in case anyone wants to use the official
I will
David
do
Allen
that.
task manager.
There you go. All right, so you're a gamer now.
Yes, I am. I don't think you know this yet, but I bought a Nintendo Switch.
What?
I did.
Okay.
So
I know very little about these things. I know there's a lot of hype around them. I am so far from a gamer, but okay, go.
Well, I was too. I mean, the last game that I got into was Skyrim for Xbox 360, which originally came out 5 or 6 years ago. Like before, I think we had one kid at the time, and he was young, so I would play it, at night after he went to bed. That's how long ago it was. Mm. But I've heard a lot of things about the Nintendo Switch. I've heard about it before it was launched, and I just thought it sounded dumb, honestly. Like, who wants a console that you can pick up and take with you, and sometimes you can play it on the TV? Like, that just sounds there's going to be a ton of compromises technically, and it's not going to be a very good system. Plus, the last several Nintendo systems have not been great. But one of the things I do like about Nintendo is that they have a lot of intellectual property, like Mario, Zelda, which are still a ton of fun, but also very family friendly. So my kids are to the age now, Toby is 9, where he's getting into video games, and we've still got the Xbox 360, and he's still playing, Lego Star Wars and stuff like that, which is fun. But he's at the point now where it's getting a little old for him, and he's wanting to do something else. And so it's well, his friends are probably going to be playing Call of Duty and stuff like that, and I don't necessarily want him doing that yet. Right. So what are the options here? And I have another friend who is he streams for a living. He bigstream.net is his website where he actually will teach people how to stream on Twitch. So he's built a brand and a business around this, and he plays video games essentially 12 hours a day every day. And he told me, he's like, you got to check out the Switch. It's an awesome console, and it would be perfect for you. And because he knows that my kids are gamers and stuff like that. And I'm like, what? Serious? And he's like, yeah, you really need to give it a shot. And so I checked it out, and turns out that they launched at the beginning of April. If you didn't pre-order them, you couldn't get one. And even now, if you were to go on Amazon, you can't buy one. But one time I was working on something, and he sent me a Twitter direct message. He's like, hey, Prime members on Amazon can get the Switch right now. You should go get it. And I missed it. By the time I looked at it, they were sold out again. It was 20 minutes later. And he's like, oh, man, those went quick. Yeah. I'm like, oh, well, no big deal. Just let me know, I guess, if it happens again. So he let me know a second time, and they were available. So I bought it. And I'm like, well, even if I don't like it, they're in such high demand right now that I can sell it and I can make money on this thing. Right. So I bought a Switch, and I bought Zelda Breath of the Wild, and it's amazing. I absolutely love it. And I haven't really gotten into a video game in in the past several years. But one of the things that's always been on my list, that comes up again and again and again, is I need to make more time to play. And turns out I actually do like gaming, and especially playing Zelda on the Switch. It's a really fun, expansive, like huge game where you can kind of go anywhere, do anything. Super, super fun. And even if there were no other games that came out on the Switch, like that would be enough for me.
Nice. So don't plan on hooking me on this one.
I'll bring it to Max Stock so you can try
Okay.
it
All right, you do that. We'll see how long I get stuck on it. How's the speed reading going?
Speed reading has kind of been put on pause for the time being because I had some other projects that I was working on. I was traveling. Actually, that's essentially right now. And starting up in a week or two, I'm going to get back into it. Yeah, I don't want to make this the Mike Complains show, but I had to travel last week, and I flew United, which is in the news right now. Oh my gosh! So when I flew, I was standing in line to come back from Austin because we did our second quarter planning. I was about to board the flight to Chicago, which was already 45 minutes late because the crew wasn't there, even though they were in Austin. They got stuck in traffic. Oh, and I'm like, you're in Austin. How do you not know that there is traffic at 5 p.m.? Whatever. Thanks. Now I'm going to get stuck overnight at an airport. Well, it turns out I didn't even get on that plane because my flight from Chicago to Appleton was canceled. I got the notification as the plane was boarding. So I go to the front desk and I'm like, what do I do? And they're like, just stay. We'll figure something else out after we board the plane. Mm-hmm. So they boarded the plane, and turns out there was no other options available to me. And the official reason for canceling the flight, I'm going to pull this up. I took a picture of it on my phone because I'd never seen this before. Let's see. Where is it? Okay. It says, canceled due to air traffic control conditions impacting our flight operations. Okay. So they told me weather related. I called my wife to let her know that I wasn't coming home tonight because of weather. And she's like, what weather? I mean, this is Chicago to Appleton. It's a 3-hour drive. If there is no weather in one of these places, there's no weather in the other either.
Right.
Especially in April. Like if there was snow or something, that maybe I could see, but there was no weather. Mm-hmm. I have a friend whose dad used to work for United. I showed him that. He's like, yeah, they probably just didn't have enough people on the plane to make it to justify the fuel cost, so they canceled it. Thank you, United. But they told me that it was weather related, so they wouldn't even pay for a hotel.
Oh my
So
gosh.
I'm running up and down the Austin airport, talking to Southwest, talking to Delta, all these other places to try and get another flight home. Southwest could have got me in at like 12:30 into Milwaukee, but my wife's got to drive an hour and a half to pick me up. I'm like, nah, it's not a great option. Found a Delta flight that would have worked, and United's like, oh yeah, we can book you on a Delta flight. I'm like, okay, this is the one I want. And they're like, oh, we can't get you on that one. And I'm like, it's available. I have it up on my app. I can buy the ticket right now. What do you mean you can't get me? Oh, I don't know. We just can't do that. There's space available, but we can't book that one. And I'm like, ugh. So I stayed in some sleazy hotel, didn't sleep, got up at 4 a.m. to fly back. And then like 2 days later, this thing comes out where they basically beat up this guy and dragged him off the plane.
Right.
And prior to my customer service experience, where like the lady that I was talking to was just rude, I'm like, I got to get home. Same thing that these staff people were saying. I got to get to Louisville.
Right.
Sorry, nothing we can do. Weather related. Da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, come on. There is something you can do. You can get me on this Delta flight right here. Nope. Yeah. Sorry, I can't do that. Well, can you at least like find me a place to stay? Because like there was so much stuff going on in Austin that week that I was there that I couldn't even find a hotel that was even really close to the airport. Like,
right.
It was ridiculous. And and then the CEO's responses were like, he initially is like, well, we're sorry we had to reaccommodate the passenger. And then later on, he sends out the letter to the employees. You guys did the right thing. And then finally, the third time, he's like, we're deeply sorry. Our deepest sympathies. And I'm like, whatever. You're just saying that because your stock lost $750 million yesterday.
I heard it broke $1 billion. So
Did
time
it?
it was all said and done. I think it was across a couple
Good.
days, but yeah, it
Man.
was significant.
So, Mike, follow up. Mike is never flying United again.
This is partly why I fly Delta all the time. But part of that's because I've got MSP not far from me. Didn't mean to rhyme that. But they they have their own terminal. So Delta has their own massive terminal, and then everybody else shares their own in a different, and they're on different locations. So you literally have to take a tram from one to the other because they're separate buildings that are like half a mile away from each other. So yeah, I always fly Delta. I have never really had any experiences like what people talk about with United at all. There you go. In other news, I bought a Rhino.
Nice. About time.
Sits on my nightstand. First thing I see when I get up in the morning. Hi, Rhino.
Sean Blanc sent me a picture of a Etsy print he bought with a rhino on it.
Nice. I need to get some more, but I have the little figurine there. In other news, your Apple script, Mike, you are it. I'm thinking I'm going to have to put a time frame on this thing because it doesn't look like anybody wants to be nagged like you do.
Fine.
All right, so here you go. So when this episode airs, I'm going to say 2 weeks from the day this thing comes out. If that thing hasn't hit its goal, I'm going to pull it down and refund.
Do me a solid, people. Come on.
So that means that whenever this comes out, the next episode, so we're going to talk about Grit here in a little bit if we ever get past all our follow-up and stuff. But we're going to talk about Grit, and then the next book we'll talk about later. But whenever the following episode comes out, if it's not up by that time, I'm sorry, Mike.
That's okay. We tried.
All right, so that's done. We got a listener question this time via email, and I get a handful of these that are they're mostly like, where do you buy your books, and some things like that aren't really that. They're not complicated questions. This one I thought was interesting. So this comes from Justice, and have you read through this, Mike?
Yes. Put it in the show notes. Why don't you just read through it for the sake of the listeners? Because this is a great question.
Just so that everybody gets. Yeah, I did think it was good. So this comes from Justice. I am reading these books along with you. While reading, I really enjoy it. After a book is finished, though, I struggle with all the new information. Where do I keep it? I'm afraid it will slip away. How is it possible to remember all the important details from these books? What is your method of making notes? Is it only important to write down the broad outlines? The personal MBA, for example, is loaded with useful information. How can I make a system so I can quickly find the information back? Thanks for your time. Kind regards, Justice.
Yeah, so this is a great question, and my answer is going to be probably a little bit different. But there are a couple of articles on the Agent Efficiency site that I've seen. I'll see if I can find some of these links and maybe put them in the show notes on how to effectively read and implement what you're learning. But my approach to this is a little bit different because I am not necessarily concerned about applying as much as possible from the personal MBA. So my theory behind what I read is that if I constantly am getting these good inputs, essentially, and then I'm teasing out a couple different things that I'm actually going to apply, which is where the action items come in, then to a sense, whatever sticks, whatever doesn't, I'm okay with that. Because if a constant stream of inputs, which are going to give me a bigger toolbox essentially to work from, I'm not necessarily concerned about whether all of those tools are organized perfectly. What I really want to happen is that next time I'm facing a particular situation and I'm thinking, how do I solve this? I don't necessarily have an archive that I'm going to go back and reference and do a search or whatever, but I'm going to think like, okay, just looking at this problem, how do I best solve this? If I've got a bigger toolbox to work with, if there's a bunch of things that I'm putting in there that are going to provide different perspectives and different options in terms of how you would do that, like I'm going to connect those dots a little bit differently than I would have done it previously before I had read all the books. And so I'm kind of fine with just dealing with the things as they are, applying a few of the specific things, via the action items, but then not trying to make sure that like 60% of the book at least I've got, documented in an Evernote somewhere that I can go back and reference later. But if you want to do that sort of thing, I totally get that. And that's where some of those articles would come in. Like one way that people do it, I know, is like they'll mind map the book while they are reading it, and they'll put it down the specific items. We kind of do that when we read for this. I've got an app called Shelf that I use, and I just jot down as I'm reading whatever stands out to me. And then I pick out a couple of those things, throw them on the outline, and I've got essentially a bunch of different notes for all of these books that I can go back and reference, but I'm not making sure that I'm going back and referencing these every year or something like that. Although I get it, if people want to do that sort of thing, that's just not how I do it. Does that make sense?
It makes sense to me. I mean, I don't go quite as far. Well, maybe I do. I don't know. I do things quite a bit differently because I write my notes down as I'm reading the book, and I keep a book index at the back. So at the back of the book, and where did I get this? It was from a podcast with Tim Ferriss and Maria Popova, I think, of Brain Pickings. And they both talked about how they do these indexes at the back. And I think Sean Blanc does this too. But as you run across something that strikes you, you write down the topic of that quote, underline it, and then put the page number to it. So you basically create your own index of topics and things you find interesting in the book. So I do that. But one of the things that I write down, and we talked about this probably a couple months ago at this point, about, it wasn't the personal MBA, it was, not going to think of which one it was. It's funny, I can't think of the name of the book, and we're sitting here talking about retaining information. But it was the concept of doing a commonplace book. And I keep one of those topic things in the back of my book index is for the commonplace. And essentially what I do is I take those particular ones and then I make sure it's something that I want to put in my commonplace before I actually do it. And then I've got a notebook that I handwrite that quote into my commonplace book, and then it's my goal to memorize those. So I literally memorize probably one or two quotes that really strike me from a book. Mm-hmm. And I try the best I can to commit those to memory. And it's just something I work on, I wouldn't say daily, but every couple days. I work on memorization of my commonplace, which is interesting because you can pull those out at different times. But the other thing I do, so I'm committing some of those to memory, and then my general notes, because I pull 2 or 3 of those of my notes out for our bookworm outline that we talk through. And I usually have 15 or 16 things that I've written down that strike me in a book as something I want to write down. Anyway, I have these kind of like a templated project in OmniFocus that prompts me to review and reread those notes at different intervals. So I will, like, for example, the book we're going to go through today, Grit, once I've completed reading that, I take those notes and I create a project for it where I will review those notes in 1 month, and then within 4 months, so 3 months after I've reviewed it, and then again 6 months after that. So 1 month from now, I'll review my notes from Grit. 4 months from now, I'll review them again. And then in 10 months, I'll review them again. And then after that, I just kind of quit at that point. Otherwise, I'm just constantly rereading notes from a book. And I've learned that if I do that, it's a way of recalling that information. And it seems to work pretty well to help me remember it. But I would say that I don't worry a whole lot about letting information slip away, because I'm always reading something new. So if I get too concerned about trying to retain one book, that's fine. If you're concerned about it that much, I would just say reread it later on, like in 6-7 months. If it's that important to you, reread it. We reread Getting Things Done, and we still talk about it. It's still an important book, but that's what I would do, is reread it. And if that particular topic is something that you want to continue to learn about, I would just say pick up another book similar to it and keep going.
Yeah, I think at the very end of that, you really hit on something where if it's something that you really want to learn more about, pick up another book on it and keep going. If you're following along with Bookworm, maybe you're in a position like we are where you're dealing with these specific problems and these books are really the right thing at the right time. That is an ideal scenario. The more likely scenario, at least for some of these books, is that whatever book we're covering maybe isn't exactly what you need. And that's okay. I mean, there's some books that you've picked, Joe, that I was like, well, I don't know about this one. And I'm sure that there's some vice versa. But Brandon Wentland, which is a friend of mine, Brandon Wentland, who was actually just on the Productivity Show podcast to talk about 12-week year stuff. He also wrote a post on Asian efficiency, which I just sent you via chat, on letting your biggest problems speed up your reading. And the gist of this article, which I think makes a ton of sense, is that you identify the problem that you're trying to solve, and then you find the book that you think can help you solve it, and then you read that book. And if you read it that way, I guarantee you're going to retain a lot more naturally, because this is very applicable and it solves a problem that you're having right at this moment. And then, you don't have to create all of the systems on the back end in order to retain that stuff if you don't want to, which is kind of my approach. I mean, I totally understand why people would want to do that. You want to have that big reference system that you can go back to. Me, I just want to read the books. And then I want to be held accountable. I mean, accountability is another big thing where, you can read a book and you can say, yeah, I'm going to do this, 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 and this because I wrote down these 25 things, but that doesn't really matter if you don't follow through with them. So like the podcast essentially for us is serving as a way of holding each other accountable to the things that we say that we're going to do. I think that's a really important piece for anything, whether it's applying what you're learning in books or just general productivity stuff. If you have a goal in mind, the best thing that you can do to make sure that you hit it is to write it down. And then I would say even further than that, tell somebody else about it and say, hey, call me out if I don't hit this, because they can make sure that you're going to follow through and do the things that you said you were going to do, which will ultimately get you to that goal. Productivity and goal achievement really isn't that complicated. All you have to do is identify what you want to do, and then you have to identify the things that you need to do on a regular basis that will get you there. And then you just have to show up and do those things. But that is easier said than done.
Oh, yeah. Definitely easier said than done. I mean, take a look at the book we're going to go through today. Nice segue there, Mike. Because the book today is about exactly that, is how do you push through things you don't want to do, and how do you develop the perseverance to drive towards your passion, which is a lot of what productivity and goal setting is about. In like, why do you do it? Like, why do I get into productivity? Why am I so interested in all these tools? And why am I getting onto Mike for doing to-do versus OmniFocus or even exploring it? Like, why do we get onto these things? And it has a lot to do with using these tools and systems to help us get towards our end goal and to drive towards our passions, which is what Angela Duckworth takes us through in our book for today called Grit. And this is a book that I picked for Bookworm, and I tried to do some digging, Mike, to figure out where I had this recommended, and I could not find it. It wasn't even on my books to read list. I'm not really sure how I picked this or where it came from, but it was one that I think was recommended in a book that we recently read. Does that sound familiar? Because I think I just put it directly on the Bookworm list whenever I saw it, because it never hit any of my personal lists.
That could be. To be honest, I've heard about this book for many years, or maybe not many years, but pretty much from when the day it came out, because I used to work full-time with a family business, and we had a product called Personal Responsibility, and there was a scale in there called Resiliency, which my dad is the one who developed the assessment. He coordinated all the research behind it, and then when this book came out called Grit, he absolutely hated the term grit. He's like, what, is this sandpaper? And
well, the book came out in 2016, so it couldn't have been that long ago.
Okay, well, the concept of grit I know has been around for a while. Maybe right. She's been doing research on this, so maybe he bumped into
right.
Angela
She's been researching it for well over a decade. I know that.
Yeah, exactly. So kind of in our industry, we were a small software publisher. And I think he was just kind of frustrated by the fact that we weren't able to get the recognition that Angela Duckworth was, and all of a sudden people are talking about grit, and he's been doing the same sort of thing with this personal responsibility concept for, the assessment's been out probably 15 years at this point. So people are like, yeah, grit, this new thing. And he's like, no, it's not a new thing, and grit is a terrible term. So I was like, when I was reading this, I'm like, Dad, please forgive me.
Nice.
I feel like I'm
glad I could inflict a little
fraternizing with the enemy. But it's a great book. And yeah, like exactly what you were talking about. She mentions at the beginning, our potential is one thing, what we do is quite another. Greatness is doable. It is many, many individual feats, and each of them is doable. And that kind of gets into like the whole premise of the book. Why do some people do them and why do some people don't? And she says that it's grit. And the first talking point I wrote down here, because this is at the beginning of the book, was this equation, which I thought was kind of neat, where she kind of defines talent, skills, and achievement. Because most people think that if you go with the person who is talented, you're going to get better results. And she actually says that according to her research, if you go with the person who has talent, you're probably going to get less results because they're going to coast by on that talent up until a certain point. And then when things get hard, they're going to take the easy way out. And that's not obviously every single scenario, but these equations that she put forth, she says talent times effort equals skill, and skill times effort equals achievement. So this is where a lot of different things come in here. Deliberate practice, making sure that you're doing the right things over and over and over again. But you can overcome a lot of talent deficiency simply by effort, and that is really getting at the heart of what grit is and why that translates into achievement.
Yeah, I was trying to look up. She's got a definition for grit, and I can't locate it. Do you have that one?
I don't. I mean, she talks about it throughout the entire book, and every chapter. One of the things I liked about this book is every chapter added like a different context or a different perspective to it, and so I kind of felt like the definition of grit kept evolving as the book went on. So I wasn't too concerned with the specific definition. But one quote, which I think kind of summarizes it, as she shares at the beginning, is by Will Smith. He says, "I'm not afraid to die in a treadmill. I will not be outworked, period."
Right.
And I think that just encapsulates it.
Yeah. It's something that I feel like is so important, especially in our culture today, because there are a lot of people who want something given to them without working for it. And I'll admit, there's a lot of times where I feel that way. Like, I am just tired of working my tail off to get somewhere with my business. I'm just tired of it. Can somebody just, give me $1 million and I'll just quit? Like, I think of that on occasion, which is kind of sad. But it's something that you can definitely build and you can work on and get better at. But I don't think it's as common. Like, I don't think that grit is something that is, I guess, increasing in our society. To me, my perception is that people who have a lot of grit are fewer and further between. Do you agree with that?
Completely agree with that. In fact, it's kind of interesting that this book follows up Step by Chris Capehart. It would be interesting to get his perspective on this book, because the whole premise of his book is you just need to take one step and then another step and then another step. And the way that you take those steps is by establishing this grit. And what's interesting about this is I think that grit would fall under the category of like soft skills. And I would say that grit can be acquired, it can be learned, it can be taught much more easily than hard skills, which is generally your reading, writing, and arithmetic. And going back to research in like 1905 or something, it's been shown that soft skills, so grit would be in that category, actually account for up to 85% of your personal and professional success. So I think that this is just absolutely critically important, but it's not emphasized. What is emphasized is you are the product of your environment. It's not your fault. The whole victim mentality, things are the way they are. There's nothing you can do to change them. And rely on the system to help you out, which I understand the system is there to support you and stuff like that. And maybe you were disadvantaged at the beginning, but what matters is not where you start. What matters is how you finish. And that's the whole idea here, is that every single person that she features in this book, pretty much, they weren't the most talented. They didn't start off the best, but they overcame that with effort and discipline, and she would call it grit. And she talks about some people in here who are, you would think that they are the role model. They are the gold standard for successful people. I mentioned Will Smith. She talks about Michael Phelps. She talks about the Seattle Seahawks when they won the Super Bowl. There's a lot of different stories in here about people who have applied grit to overcome the deficiencies. And most people, I don't think, understand. I didn't really even fully understand before I read this book how much that can be overcome simply by developing this mindset that, I'm not going to give up when stuff gets tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she explores a lot of things where, some people just seem to be born with grittiness. Other people don't want anything to do with it. I think there's a little bit of genetics involved with each of those, and there's parenting involved with some of it as she goes into. There's a lot of aspects that impact it. I'm curious, Mike, did you do the quiz to figure out what your grit score is? And do you want to share that number?
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe I should lay out the whole scale here, because and it's a 10-question quiz, or what do you call it? It's not a quiz. It's a
assessment.
There you go, assessment. And the ratings time you're done, whether you end up doing the math, it comes out between a 1.0 and a 5.0, with 1.0 being you don't have any grit at all, and 5.0 is you don't ever stop doing what you want to do. So I guess that'd be my interpretation of it. So where'd you land, Mike?
I was a 4.4, which is between 80 and 90%.
Huh.
Keep in mind, I grew up working for a family business ever since I was 12. I've been helping with product development,
right?
This personal responsibility product, and this stuff has been drilled in me from a very early age.
Right.
So I think I've got a little bit of an advantage, a little bit of a head start. I gave the same assessment actually to my squad, my discipleship group at church, because I was telling them about this book as we were going through it, and had them all do it, and they were kind of all in the 3 range, which was really interesting to me because I think a lot of those guys I would describe as gritty, they're not going to give up. But I think that when I took the assessment, kind of what I understood in the mindset of this was just how effective what my dad did, my upbringing was in terms of this stuff. And I can really see the benefit of that now.
Yeah. So I took it twice. And I took it twice because in one sense, I was thinking primarily about my work in the sense of working on the computer. And in the other sense, because I realized that I've got kind of 2 different ways that I work. One is with the intellectual world, which is on the computer like I'm talking about. The other is whenever I'm doing something around the house or something outdoorsy of some sort, because I do a lot of that. And I feel like they both have completely different, I come at those completely different. So I took it with both of those in mind. And if I focus on the outdoorsy DIY side, I fall at a 4.4 in that range, which I could see. I don't care if it's -10 outside, I'm going to finish the deck today. I just have that mindset with some things, and I think that's a lot of the farm coming out in me. I still have agriculture in my blood. If I focus on the computer side of things, I come in at a 2.9.
Whoa.
That's how wide of a variance there is on that. I have to put all kinds of systems in place to get me to do stuff on a computer. It's crazy to me that it could vary that much between those 2 mindsets. But I thought it was interesting to at least compare the 2. It seems interesting that those 2 different modes of working have such a different grit score. That was interesting.
That is really interesting. I also thought it was interesting how she's got is it the odd number questions can determine your passion score, and the even numbers determine your perseverance score. Did you do that part of it?
I did do that. And in both cases, perseverance was higher than passion. Not really sure why that was. But
yeah, she says that's normal. Yeah, my passion score was 4.2. My perseverance score was 4.6. And I don't want this to come across as a brag in my results. In some essences, this is a bad thing because specifically with agent efficiency and the sprint planning that we do, when you do Scrum and you do sprint planning and you have the story points, essentially what you're doing is you're agreeing as a team that we're all gonna do this many story points. But because we have a small team and we have a somewhat specialized team and we're in the middle of a development project for a product that we're going to release, a lot of the specific development side of this falls on me, especially when Tan and Brooks tend to be, they've been traveling the last couple sprints. So we'll agree to this stuff. And we'll get into the middle of a sprint, and one of these issues may end up being a lot bigger than we originally estimated it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to finish that no matter what. I can't get myself to be okay with letting these issues roll over. In fact, this last sprint, one of the issues did roll over that was assigned to me, and it just frustrated me all weekend that I was not going to be able to finish this thing, even though I was working on it on the weekend because I was trying to get it done. Like, this stuff just eats me up if I can't finish it. And so, like, that would be an application of this in the negative sense. Like, you have to be okay sometimes with the whole idea of margin and, this is good enough. But I have trouble with that.
Yeah, I'm the opposite with that stuff, because if I realize that I'm not going to hit something, or I feel like it's going to be too much to accomplish in the time frame that I have for it, I tend to justify and say, well, I could work on it maybe a little bit Saturday morning, and then I can pick it up Monday morning and I'll be done with it by Monday afternoon. Like, if I can come up with that mindset on, say, Thursday morning, I won't touch it at all until probably Saturday, or even I won't touch it at all until maybe Tuesday, and I'm already late again. Like, I tend to do that just because, like, it's not worth the heartache that comes with it, with the intellectual side. Again, if it's something around the house, I will spend way longer on it than I need to in order to get it done by the time frame that I want to get it done. It's kind of crazy how it's so different to me, those two perspectives. It's almost like if I'm trying to, like, if I can solve the problem of how to accomplish something time-wise in my head, if I can solve that problem of how to actually get it done, it's as if I don't need to do it because I've already solved the problem, and solving the problem is the part that I like doing. So if I can solve the problem of how do I need to plan out this work, or what's the path forward to accomplish this by a certain date, if I can solve the problem time-wise of how that's going to work, to me, it's almost like I've already accomplished it, even though I haven't touched it, which is a problem because then I still have to do the work to actually follow through on that. And that whole follow through thing is something I really struggle with, especially with the intellectual stuff.
Interesting. So the phrase that she uses here is, enthusiasm is common, endurance is rare. It sounds like you're saying that you have to manufacture the endurance.
Exactly. It's like I can, if it's something new and shiny, like, for example, I've got this other podcast that I'm starting with a buddy of mine, it's a new and shiny. So I can go spend time on that. It's fun. It's play for me to go build, like, the websites and stuff for that. But whenever it's something that I don't necessarily want to do or like to do, or don't fully understand what it is I'm going to try to accomplish, if I hit any one of those, I tend to try to put it off, and the whole procrastination thing becomes a battle for me.
Yeah, and that's a perfect segue into the next point, where on page 106, she says that before hard work comes play. And actually, what she says even before that is what really caught my attention. She's talking to this person, and this person says that the whole idea of, do what you love is kind of bad advice. And I would agree to that to a certain extent. Maybe we can talk a little bit about passion and what that really looks like, but it's not necessarily doing the fun things all the time. Right. But the person that she's talking to says most people stink at the things they love, and they were using that as justification for why that is bad advice, because you want to do the things that you're good at. You'll get paid more for those things. And then she counters that and says, most people stink even more at what they don't love, which I thought was really good. And you're talking about podcasting, like, essentially what you're doing is you are doing what you love. And the more that you do the thing that you love, and the more deliberate you're going to be in your practice, you're going to be looking at, how do I make this thing even better? In the area of podcasting, you're going to be looking at, well, how do I tweak this audio setting so the audio sounds even better? Like, how do I do the EQ settings? I mean, I went down that path when we were launching the productivity show. I started listening to all these different podcasts and taught myself all about compression, all about EQ, all about noise gates, and all of this different stuff. And that was because I was so driven by, like, I want this thing to be the very best that it can be. And the first couple you throw out there, maybe they stink, maybe they're not that great, but you learn. And as you iterate, I'm not saying that about your podcast, Joe. You've done a great job with bookworms.
It's fine, I'll say it.
But the important thing is that you iterate, and as you iterate that process, if you love the thing that you're doing, each iteration, like, you're exponentially getting better. And if you don't have that passion that's driving you to do that sort of thing, it's really hard to maintain that motivation. Backing up a few pages, she has a definition for passion. She says, passion for your work is a little bit of discovery, followed by a lot of development, and then a lifetime of deepening, which is really, really important, I think. Like, you have to try new things. And that's why, like, the do what you love isn't necessarily good advice, because you can be narrow focused on your current set of experiences, and you can get kind of sidetracked down this you can go down this path where, like, this is the thing that I love. This is the thing. I'm positive. I know this is the thing that I love because this is the best thing I've found out of my current set of experiences. But as you try new things, you'll find that, hey, that new thing, that's even better. And it's a better use of my skill set. And I can totally see how what I'm doing here can be morphed into that thing. That's kind of my experience with Asian Efficiency. Like, when I joined the team, I was a writer. And as I wrote, I started developing scripts for video. Now I do a lot of video production. I do a lot of podcasting. I use the skills that I developed as a writer, especially for the videos. I'm writing scripts and I'm recording audio, stuff like that. But I don't necessarily write all the time, because that is one step on the path of finding the thing that I'm really, really good at, the thing that I'm quote unquote passionate about. You know, the thing that I absolutely love to do, and it hurts me when I can't do that. Ultimately, like, that's the definition of passion. I talk a little bit about it in my book. The root word for passion is the Latin word pati, which literally means to suffer. And so the thing that you are passionate about, literally, it is the thing that you are willing to suffer to see come about. In the context of podcasting, for example, you got to get this thing out into the world. You want to start this podcast with a friend of yours, and the idea of not being able to do that hurts to a certain extent. That was the way it was with me when I started writing my book. Like, I tell the story all the time that I'm not a morning person, but I started getting up at 5 a.m. to write for an hour before I went into work, because that passion, that vision, that dream, having it be as strong as it was, that drove me. That vision drove me. And obviously, like, vision can be worked into this discussion on grit here, but ultimately that passion, I think that we really need to understand this before we can really develop the grit, because the passion is kind of like your compass. It makes sure that you're heading in the right direction.
How many times do books tell us to find your purpose in life and find your calling? And we talk about it all the time. What's your mission? And
yep,
it's when you figure that out that so much of this stuff comes to. It all comes to fruition at that point. And until you get to that point, it's really difficult to do the stuff you don't want to do. Like, take my example here, where if I have a client that comes to me and they want, say, a new Discourse plugin, if it's something I've done before, it's pretty easy for me to just say, sure, I'll do it. And then, I spend 20 minutes copy pasting and tweaking, and then I'm done. Like, that's awesome from a financial standpoint, but it's really kind of boring. It's like, okay, I need a challenge and a problem that I haven't solved before with a lot of these things. But if somebody comes to me with a plugin that they want for Discourse, and it's something that no one's really comprehended before, and we start trying to do mock-ups and we go through the process of figuring out how it should work and everything, and then I go build that, I have a hard time putting it down. Like, that is something that I can really get engrossed in. And go into this whole process of learning how to get it done and digging into code bases, and I get excited by that. For some weird reason, I know it's probably a bit demented. Anyway, it's fun digging through code in that sense for me, because it's problems to be solved, and that's what I'm trying to do. But if it's something I've done before, the problem's already been solved. Like, that's the part that gets me excited, is solving new problems in technology. And if it's a problem that already has a solution, I don't really want to touch it. I'm like, okay, this is boring. It's not a challenge anymore, and I don't really want to go there.
Interesting. So I had this down as an action, well, not an action item like for following the podcast, but I actually wrote this down to ask you, So
Okay.
I'm putting you on the spot here.
All right.
But
Hit me.
what is your purpose?
Yeah, I struggled with this a little bit because I know what I see as some of my mission, but I don't think that translates into a purpose. And I use those two words specifically here because I've been on a mission to do something, but I don't know that I've ever connected the feeling side of it, which is where I think the purpose comes in. Because that was something I noticed, especially in Angela's definitions here of how this all plays together, because there's a definite internal feeling that drives a lot of what we should do or what we want to do. So I've had this mission of helping people with technology for quite a while, and I've been on that path. And I can tell you that, through what I've been explaining to you, that doesn't always hold true. Like, I can go help people with technology. That's fine. I can build websites and help people accomplish what they want to do. But that doesn't necessarily translate to me getting excited about going and doing it, as I've talked about.
Right.
So the challenge here is, how do you translate that and what do I do with it? Because I need to determine, how does that translate into a passion of mine that I am excited to get up and go to work on. And I cannot tell you that I have this perfectly laid out at the moment. This is part of what, I've got an action item down here to connect with my purpose. And I say that a bit preemptively because that requires the purpose to be defined. And I'm not 100% on that. But I'll give you what I got so far, okay? Where I'm at with it right now is essentially helping people solve new problems with technology. And the caveat there of new problems is very important because it's hard for me to get excited about things that aren't new. And I'm aware of that. This is partially why I spend a lot of time searching for new patents in the technology world to try to turn those into businesses. That's a thing that I really love doing. But it's not something I'm building, but it is still solving a problem, which is why, like, the website thing and that, to me, are the same, which is really weird. Mm-hmm. But that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to solve problems with technology. And for me, that translates in so many ways with, I meet face-to-face with people who want a website, but I'm more interested in understanding what their business is and understanding what is it that you actually want your business to accomplish. Like, those are the questions I tend to ask because I want to know how the technology and how the websites can help them meet those goals. So I have this passion for helping other people meet their goals, primarily in the realm of technology. And if I understand what their goals as a business are, it's a lot easier for me to help them get there. So many times I have people come to me and say, I just need it to look like this. And they give me this exact set of parameters that they want spelled out. And a lot of times I back away from that. It's like, I don't know that that's actually what you want. And if I do it, there's a good chance you're not going to be happy with it because it doesn't look the way you think it was going to turn out. Like, I just don't like doing that. So I ask these why questions a lot, and I know I'm on a rant right now, but it's maybe not a rant, but a ramble. But I go through this process of trying to solve these technological problems with people and trying to find solutions to them. So I'm trying to tweak and morph my purpose into the excitement that can come from creating those solutions, and that's where I want to direct myself.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, because you do a lot of technical stuff, I think that you could probably relate very well to the story of the three bricklayers on page 149.
Yep.
Where, for those who aren't familiar with it, essentially she tells the story of these three people who were laying bricks and asks the first one, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm laying bricks." Asks the second one, "What are you doing?" And he says, I'm building a church." Third one, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm building the house of God." They're all doing the same activity, but their perspective on what they're doing is different. And she defines it, I've heard this story before, but she defines it as the first has a job, the second has a career, the third has a calling. And a job is the necessity of life. It's a thing that you have to do to make the money that you need to live. A career is a stepping stone to another job, but the calling is one of the most important things that you can identify in your life. So my purpose, I wrote down, and maybe this isn't where it's going to end up, but as I am reading this book, like, I was constantly thinking about that, like, what is my purpose, which is why I asked you. And I didn't write it down word for word because I think it's going to change, but essentially what it is helping people make the most of their talent so that they can live the life that they were created for. And that's going to manifest itself a lot of different ways. It could be technology related, helping people become more productive using their technology, specifically Apple technologies, because that's kind of my domain of experience.
So you need to put Apple tech in there.
But I don't necessarily want it to remain Apple tech forever. Who knows what the next thing is. At the moment, it's iPhones and iOS and stuff like that, but you never know where things are going to go. So I've kind of view that as like pigeonholing the purpose. Maybe right now, that would be accurate, but
Angela would say it could change too.
Exactly. But ultimately what I want to do and my purpose, she says that your purpose is the intention to contribute to the well-being of others too. So there has to be an others focused aspect to this, I believe, where everybody says, I want to make the world a better place. But essentially that has to be true for your purpose, because if you're just trying to collect and hoard as much as you can, then that's not really going to be fulfilling, regardless of your religious or personal belief system. She makes it sound like this is something that you absolutely have to have as part of your purpose. And so that was the reason that I wrote my book, because I saw that there was a huge void. Really what kind of struck me was a quote by Todd Henry in the book Accidental Creative, I think it was, where a friend asked him, what's the most valuable land in the world? And he's threw out real estate in Manhattan, the oil fields of Saudi Arabia. And his friend says, no, it's actually the graveyard, because that's where all of the unwritten books, unstarted businesses, all of the stuff that people said, I'm going to get to that tomorrow. And they eventually ran out of tomorrows. And those are the things that maybe could have changed the world. There's a lot of stories about people who, they came from nothing. And how many other people do we write off because they come from nothing? Whereas I guess my purpose is I want to help people, regardless of their situation, make the most of what they have so that they can reach their full potential and just eliminate the roadblocks and the obstacles that might get in the way of doing that.
This is probably why you and I connect so well, because with your purpose and mine, although they're fairly different, we tend to translate them into the same day-to-day activities, close to anyway, because we're both trying to help other people get better at something or accomplish something that they can't necessarily do without help. So I think it's cool. It's fun to see, what drives a lot of what we do online.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got a quote on here, Fall 7, Rise 8. What was the culture that this came from?
This is the Japanese culture, the culture of Kaizen.
Of course.
Which, again, appeared in this book a little bit earlier. I think it was page 118, when she's talking about the deliberate practice. But yeah, I love this saying, Fall 7, Rise 8. And really the essence here is that it doesn't matter if you fail. What matters is whether you get up when you fail and how you overcome those difficulties, or whether you just give up and say, this isn't for me. Because obviously with a book about grit, there's a lot of people who overcame a lot of different things before they really realized their success. And one specific story that I thought of right away when I read this was there was a class that I was taking as part of my business degree in college, which was statistics. And I did not understand statistics. And in fact, she tells a story about failing a class and she was determined to pass. That was exactly my scenario. I did not get statistics. The teacher was kind of like, well, this is the material. You gotta do it on your own, sort of a thing. There wasn't a whole lot of support offered. It was up to me to make it happen. And so I did it though. I didn't get it at first. I think I failed the first couple tests really, really badly because I just didn't get it, but I put in a ton of extra work. And at the end of the class, I ended up getting a solid A, and I could tell my teacher, because I had met with him at the beginning, like, what are my options here? Like, I'm just not getting this. And essentially was told, well, maybe you want to consider dropping the class. And I'm like, no, I need this for my business degree. Like, I'm just going to make this work. I'll figure it out. And I did. I figured it out, and I could tell, like, by the end of the class that, and this isn't why I did it, but he was really proud of the transformation. Like, I think that was cool for him to see, but it was really rewarding for me personally, because it gave me a sense that, like, it doesn't matter what the challenge is that I'm going to face. It doesn't matter if I completely don't get it right now. I have the ability to understand this thing if I just apply enough effort. Going back to that equation at the beginning, I may not have the talent for this, but I can overcome it with my effort.
Because she has the two equations towards the beginning where, was it talent times effort equals the skill, and the skill times effort equals achievement? I think we were talking about that early on. And the part that's interesting to me about that is how effort is a double multiplier in that. Like, okay, if I spend more effort, even if I have very little talent, it can equal more achievement to someone who has a lot of talent but never puts any effort into it. So I think that's an important rule to keep in mind, because so often we run across folks who feel like they can't do something. They have, Angela talks about the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset, but I run into people a lot that have this fixed mindset that don't think they can get better at something. They're just stuck on the talent, the talent treadmill of, I can only do as good as I'm born with, and I can only go as far as I have naturally, if that makes sense. Kind of a hard way to think about it, but the important part is, do you see yourself as not able to change things, but you're able to, or you're stuck working with the circumstances and the consequences of what just naturally happens, or can you do something about it? And I think we on Bookworm talk about a lot where you got to do something about things if you expect them to change. You can't just let the circumstances of the universe just impact you and push you around. However, you have to come out and do something before you're going to get anywhere. We talk about this a lot, and that's where the effort piece comes in. It's also part of how Angela and her family do things with this hard things rule, which I think is interesting because they're specifically trying to train grit into their kids and themselves, which I think is a very noble and very wise thing to do. So do you want to explain the hard things rule?
Yeah, and this is getting into the parenting and grit section. She's got a whole chapter on this, and
which
it's actually
I greatly
one of the
appreciated. I was very grateful for this.
Yeah, which is interesting, even if you aren't a parent, because it really gets into, how much of this is genetic or inherited, and how much of this is developed. And I think that a lot of it is developed. So specifically for parenting, it's talking about what are the strategies that you can use to develop grit in your kids, but recognizing the fact that you're not necessarily just born with this stuff and you can develop it. You can apply that to any situation, I would say. So the hard things rule comes from page 241. And essentially there's three parts to this. Number one, everyone, including mom and dad, has to do a hard thing, which is something that requires daily deliberate practice. And you get to pick your own hard thing. Actually, that's the third part is you get to pick your own hard thing. So kind of going out of order. Sorry. The second one, you can quit, but not in. Sorry, yeah, you can quit, but not until the season or the session is over. And then number three, you get to pick your own hard thing. So when I read that, I thought that was kind of out of order. So I would just boil this down to two things. You have to pick a hard thing, something that requires daily deliberate practice. You get to pick what it is. And then number two, you can quit, but not until the season or the session that you've picked is over. And then the action item actually here, and this is kind of rolled into one of my bigger action items, but this would be a specific takeaway, would be to pick hard things for everyone in my family. I think this is really, really important. Especially for my 9-year-old and my 7-year-old, where like they are playing piano and they've been practicing every single day and they're seeing a lot of growth there, but I don't think they've really consciously identified that this is a hard thing and they're recognizing that they're growing. They just show up and do it every day and they can do more. So I want to help them understand what's actually going on there.
I feel like that's not going to be easy. I was trying to think about how to explain some of this to my 4-year-old. Like, well, about that. It's like, I don't know that I have a good answer to this, but trying to help her understand, if you're, because we're trying to teach her letters and words and such now. And I learned that with her, she has a lot of talent. She's similar to me whenever I was in elementary school, because I was one that things just came to naturally. Like the way the school was taught and everything, it just clicked. Like, they'd give me math problems, I'd be done in 5 minutes and want more. Like, that was just the way I was. And our oldest, Emma, is the same way. She catches things so fast that whenever we sit down to try to teach her letters of the alphabet, she is just bored. Like, she doesn't actually work on learning them at all. She's just bored with it. But if you change the game and change it to where you're trying to learn words instead of letters, she can sit there for an hour and try to figure it out. Like, it's a completely different game to her. And it's fun to see her at least start to develop some of those skills. But when things come naturally to her, it's hard to get her to continue working on things when she doesn't want to, which is exactly what we need to be trying to do if we want to develop grit in our kids. Or even, and it doesn't have to be kids. I mean, she spells this out at the beginning of that chapter that if you're in charge of or teaching or coaching anyone, that it all is the same. Like, if you're trying to help other people get better, it's the same process for it, whatever it is you're doing. But anyway, coming back to Emma, it's a challenge to get her to figure out how to push through something that isn't easy or that doesn't come right away. So teaching her to endure and do the follow through of the hard work, I think that's going to be a challenge in and of itself to get her to that point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that a great example of how to do this, you follow Pat Flynn at all?
A little bit, yeah. What is it? Smart Passive Income?
Yep. So he's also got a book called Will It Fly? And he starts that book with a story about a paper airplane that he is helping his son create. And his son is losing interest, and Pat makes the airplane and he shows that how it flies. And his son is like, wow, that's awesome. I want to do that. And then he creates one and it doesn't fly. And he's like all disappointed and dejected and he's ready to give up. Mm-hmm. He's ready to go do something else. He's like 2 years old at the time.
Right.
And Pat's teaching him like, well, no, why do you think it didn't fly? He's like, well, it doesn't look like yours. I'm like, well, why doesn't it look like mine? Well, and then once you identify like, okay, this thing we need to change and this thing we need to change. And then they do a couple iterations and eventually they get a plane that flies. Mm-hmm. And I've been following him on social media as well. And he's been showing pictures of his son had like a lemonade stand, but it wasn't a lemonade stand. It was like a game thing. And okay. nobody stopped by, and Pat was watching this and he's feeling hurt for his son because he's got this business idea and it's not working essentially. And he said that like one of his most proudest moments was when the day was over and he's like, well, no one took advantage of my offer. I guess I got to change it or something like that. Like he's instilling digital marketing principles and really business principles in his kid who's like 4 or 5 years old and awesome. Doing, essentially a lemonade stand. And there's a lot of opportunities I think like that if we recognize them, where it doesn't necessarily have to be like, you need to understand ROI, you need to all this other stuff, but understanding and welcoming that challenge where recognizing that this thing that you want to do, it is going to be hard. And that's okay. That's actually a good thing. And then when it doesn't work, you don't just give up and say, well, I guess I don't have the talent. I wasn't able, I'm not made to do that thing, but figuring out why it doesn't work and deconstructing it and figuring out what you need to change, what you need to put in order so that it does work, and then trying again.
The process of teaching your kid to analyze what they've done wrong without criticizing them, that's not simple. And I understand what Pat's doing. And I guess I could say I could aspire to that, but I feel like this is definitely something I want to work on, which is why one of my action items is to change the way I praise my kids, because I don't want them to get the idea that they're naturally born in a certain skill, like they've got a natural skill. Like Emma definitely does. The other two do as well, but her I know more of because she's older, so I know more about her. But with her, I know that I need to be more intentional with that, and I don't want to use the praise that I give her to show that it's a talent that she's just born with. And I would rather teach her that she can always make things a little better without crushing her spirit. Because that's the trick here, is I think there's a balance between showing your kid that they can always get something better and they can always improve on something without completely destroying their drive.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And I think the easy way to do that is to, number one, be observant and understand what is going on. And I mean, you're already there. You're identifying that like things are easy for her, some things aren't easy for her. When something is easy for her, she'll get bored with it, that sort of thing. And then like whenever something happens that they might view it as a negative thing, just calmly ask them, well, why do you think that happened?
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me, that's the big thing, is like just asking them, making them think through the process and kind of figure it out, and, you know, help them along the way if they want it. But I think there's a lot of value just in them going through that thought process, whether they arrive at the right conclusions or not. You know, eventually they're going to, but learning to ask the right questions is key.
Speaking of questions, do you want to move on to action items here?
Sure. One other thing I want to call out here, though, it kind of pertains to parenting as well, is this whole idea of sisu, I believe is how they pronounced it.
Oh, right. I haven't been following the outline. Sorry, I skipped ahead.
No, that's okay. Which is the definition here. This is a term from Finland, I believe. Yeah. So sisu is a compound of bravado and bravery, of ferocity and tenacity, of the ability to keep fighting after most people would have quit, and to fight with the will to win. And it's kind of ingrained in the Finnish people that they have this sisu. And I think that this is essentially what we're trying to teach with grit. And also in this section, she talks about how you can get grit fairly easily when you join an excellent or a gritty team. And that's where there's a lot of value in joining like extracurricular activities. Athletics would be one example, where even if your kid, for example, or maybe even you, like you're not necessarily a quote unquote athlete, the things that you learn there, those can be transferred. The grit that you learned in athletics, for example, can be applied to other situations. It's a very generalizable skill. And so when it comes to developing these sorts of things, the best way that you can do this, I think, and she uses the example of ballet for her daughter, is you need to get them in on a team, essentially, with a coach or another adult who is going to display and uphold these standards that is not necessarily you as a parent. I think for us, especially because we homeschool our kids, that is extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been trying to figure out, because again, we're getting to that point where kids are starting to get into the formal school system. Like, not, we're going to homeschool, but we need to start being more intentional with it. But also, you know, does she have an interest in piano? Does she have an interest in something else that I can get her involved in? That's kind of a team effort with other kids. Like, that's what I want her to start to get into, so that she has some of this extracurricular stuff. Specifically Emma, since, you know, the other two are way too young for that at the moment. But we're starting to get to that point, and that's something I have to think about very specifically. And my wife and I have had a number of conversations on that lately. So this comes at a good time.
Nice. And I think that this, to the highest level, would be the example at the end of the book where she goes to visit the Seattle Seahawks, because she talks and basically spends the entire day with Pete Carroll, who's the coach. And if you are a football fan, you either love or you hate the Seahawks because they've traditionally been a very good team. And a lot of that has been because of Pete Carroll's coaching. He's instilled in them that you are going to be finishers. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to win everything, but they are going to fight till the very end. And if you go back and you look at the statistics, the Seahawks the last several years have been very, very good at the end of games, at the end of the season. You know, they don't always necessarily start off real well, but they'll usually end well, and then the momentum will carry them through the playoffs. And they've been in the Super Bowl a couple times, and they've won it at least once that I can remember in recent history.
Right.
but it's not necessarily because they have the most talented players. They do have a lot of very talented players, but they've completely bought into this brotherhood mentality where like they're just going to hold each other to a higher standard of excellence. And in this chapter, it talks about how Pete Carroll, even when they're picking players to draft, like they're identifying how gritty they think that these players are. And they specifically target the people that they think will do that. So one example was Earl Thomas, I believe, where Earl Thomas is a really, really good defensive back, but he's not a real big guy. And coming out of college, if I'm remembering right, he wasn't necessarily like the most talented guy, but he's the guy that just will never say die. And they've got a couple guys like that on the secondary, which they've developed this nickname, the Legion of Boom. They've been one of the best secondaries in the NFL for several years now because they've completely embraced this mentality. And so I thought this was really cool to identify that, yeah, maybe you're not going to be an NFL player, but you can develop these skills. They can be transferred to any arena, and you can take it all the way up to that elite level, no matter what arena that happens to be.
Yeah, I can't say that I'm a huge Seahawks fan, but I definitely appreciate what Pete Carroll is doing and how he comes at it. So I was grateful. You could probably tell that Angela has had a lot of back and forth with Pete Carroll, and maybe she's a Seahawks fan. That's very possible. She talks about the Seahawks a lot, it seemed. But anyway, I thought it was interesting, and it was a good example.
Yeah, definitely. And even if the Seahawks example doesn't resonate with you, there's another athletic example with the UNC soccer coach, where they've been one of the best soccer teams in the country, but they never are at the top of the recruiting class. It's once the players get into the program that they develop this grit and this never say die attitude that they're able to overcome a lot of those things. So I don't know, lots of stories in this book, lots of examples, which I thought were really good. And also with the UNC soccer example, there was a quote I wrote down, which I thought was really good. It says, "The origin of great leadership begins with respect of the commander for his subordinates." And so when you're talking about professional sports specifically, there is a tendency to view a lot of the athletes, especially as they're coming out of college, like they've been told, you're great, you've got all this talent, and a good number of them try to get by on that talent. And you can't do that, as this book is explaining.
Right.
Like the grit and the tenacity, the effort, like that can overcome any deficiency in terms of talent. But then from a professional perspective, you've got a bunch of athletes who've been told they've been great. They've signed these contracts. They've got millions and millions of dollars. They've never gone to college. And they don't know how to steward any of this stuff. So in essence, there's a tendency to view these people as kind of spoiled, like they've been given everything. And then you've got a coach who has to manage all of these personalities and develop this sense of grit and tell people essentially that you're not all that in a bag of chips. Like you have to kind of instill in them this responsibility that they've never had to develop for themselves. It can be easy to kind of projecting again. I'm not a professional coach, okay, but I can see how it would be easy to view them as lesser in a certain sense, like immature, essentially. I mean, that's what the media would say for a lot of these people. But what really works is when you can get over that mindset and you can respect the people that are underneath you, regardless of where they're from. That's a challenge that I don't necessarily have an answer for, but I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, if you can develop the mindset of pushing through things you don't want to do and sticking things out through the end, that's what this book is about. Like, how do I develop that character trait and continue to get better at what it is I want to do, connect with what it is that I see as my purpose in life, and go after it. To me, that's what the book's truly about, to sum it up.
Yep, I would completely agree.
So on that note, action items. I've got two here. One is and I've mentioned both of them so far, so this is going to be a reiteration. Sorry about that. One is to change the way I praise my kids, and that's primarily in not calling out how talented they are, as opposed to praising the effort that they put into something so that they learn that it's the hard work that matters. I still want to praise them for their accomplishments and what they achieve, but I want to specifically call out that effort piece to help them see that that's important. The other one I've got here is to connect with my purpose, which implies that I know what it is exactly. I kind of just want to spend some time reflecting on that to make sure that I'm on point with that. And then try to do a little bit further reflection to tie in what it is I do every day that connects with that. Kind of using that word twice there, but trying to make sure that what it is that I see as my very top level goal, how do I relay that all the way down to what it is that's on my runway and what it is I'm going to do right now in this moment. So I want to try to tie those two together.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I want to go back to your praising your kids thing, and I want to expound on that a little bit because I think this is, again, something that could be more difficult than first seems, because I think that the culture that's been created where everybody gets a participation ribbon, like I
hate that.
That's rooted in, well, it's rooted in the same desire that you have, though, to praise the effort. So I'm going to apply that also. The one that I wrote down because I really like this term was become a role model for my kids. Specifically, teach them the welcome challenge. And then there's some specifics that go along with that, like having everybody identify a hard thing. Changing the way that you praise your kids, I would say for me, that looks like praising the effort, but not necessarily rewarding the effort.
Yes,
If
exactly.
the results aren't there, you don't get a reward. But that's okay because you can get to the point where you get those results. You just have to change a little bit what you're doing, and you have to figure out why it's not working. So I think that's really important. But that's the big one for me. And then the other one that I wrote down, this is another person who has a TED Talk, so actually watch the TED Talk for once.
Yeah, I haven't watched hers, but I definitely, it didn't make my action items. But yeah, I'm planning to watch that probably this afternoon. I actually really enjoyed her writing style. I could sit down and read this thing for an hour with no problem. She has a lot of stories to explain her concepts as well as a lot of science. And I think she balanced the two really well. So I just really loved reading this one. I kind of wanted it to keep going.
Yeah, I did too. So what would you give it in terms of the 5-star rating?
This is one where, because we reserve certain ratings for, I hate this one or this is life-changing. And this is one that I felt like I connected with a lot personally. It's one that I've needed to read, I think, because it really struck a chord with me, because I know that I'm not necessarily a gritty person whenever it comes to things that aren't easily accomplished. Like, I just don't always stick through with things. I think that's partially because I'm typically pretty talented in some areas, and I use that word in a very direct way. But I tend to be talented in certain areas, especially when it comes to solving problems. So whenever it gets hard, I have a tendency to just stay away from it. So I really needed this book, and it really struck a chord with me. Because of that, I would consider this, in my case, life-changing. It really has a big impact on me. So I'm going to give this one a 5.
Nice. Yeah, I was tempted to give it a 5 because I think it's a really good book. I would not define it as life-changing for me for a lot of different reasons. The main one being kind of what we talked about earlier, where I've kind of grown up with this stuff. I was able to get over the stigma of my dad not liking the term grit, even though that's been drilled in me for a long time.
Is that why you can't rate it a 5 because of your dad?
No, that's not true. That's not true. I got over that. But one thing that kind of a little bit bugged me about this is, like, especially with the parenting section, she says, and it wasn't just the parenting section, there were a couple other sections where she throws out this theory, and she's like, my theory is that this is true, but I don't have enough empirical data to support that.
Right.
And then she'll talk about her experience, and her experience will make a lot of sense. And so the stories are really good that way. But I wish that she would have taken a harder stance on some of the things. Maybe that's just a researcher background as opposed to an internet marketer background like Grant Cardone in the 10X rule. But I just felt like some of the stuff she really could have just hammered it home, but she didn't. And it was essentially because she didn't have statistical numbers to back up what she was projecting. but I feel like you probably could have got those numbers. It was almost like she ran out of time when she was writing the book, is kind of my view on those sections. You can obviously take into account for parenting the whole microcosm of my kid growing up from when they're born to 18 years old. But there's got to be ways to look back at what other people have done and kind of draw some conclusions from that, which I don't know. She kind of did, but kind of didn't. She didn't, like I said,
I felt like she did.
She did to a certain degree, but I felt like she always kind of prefaced it as like, well, just so you know, this may be wrong, or, like, this is my own personal experience, so this isn't necessarily gospel truth. And Grant Cardone would be like, this is the only way to do this.
That's so true.
And then drop an F-bomb or something. But no, so that was the one thing that kind of bugged me, is like, she's got it all there. This, like, what she's telling us is really has a potential to change your life, I feel. And it's just like, come on, believe in yourself a little bit more.
Right.
So yeah, that was the one thing that kind of bugged me. So I'm going to rate it 4.5. Still a very, very great book. And the assessment itself, I think, is really, really great and eye-opening. Like if all you did was take the assessment, you would probably still get a lot out of the book.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. We kind of flipped on this one. So on 10X Rule, we were the opposite. So there you go. we can switch places on occasion. So next book up is your choice. What are we reading?
We are reading The Sleep Revolution by Arianna Huffington, which was one that I bought at Macstock last year, and I've been saying I'm going to make you read for a long time. So the time has come, Joe. We're going to learn about sleep.
So here's a question. You've said that you bought this at Macstock. I went to order it on Amazon, and I had to pre-order it on Amazon because it said it hadn't been released yet. And I was confused by that. Thankfully it released the next day, so I pre-ordered it and then it came out the next day. I have it in my hands, and the copyright is 2016-2017. Is this an updated version? I don't see.
There must be an updated version then, because like I have it on my shelf and I know that's where I got it.
Huh. Interesting. I don't know. That's kind of it struck me as odd. I was like, this doesn't add up. I don't understand the math here. Anyway, analytical Joe.
That's okay. And just a little bit of justification for this one. So I'm not sure how common knowledge this is, but I was actually diagnosed when I was 18 years old with epilepsy. And that is a genetic thing that they can't really test. They can hook your brain up to an EEG and they can tell when your brain is misfiring. But basically the kind of seizures that I have, when my brain misfires, I have a seizure. So unless I'm having a seizure when they're doing the test, it's not going to tell them anything. So I've been on medication for a while, which makes me drowsy. And one of the things that can trigger a seizure is not getting enough sleep. So sleep has been very, very important to me for a long time. It's kind of why I've been using Flux for years and why I'm so militant about like the blue light, because that was a game changer for me. But there's a lot of things coming out in the productivity space recently on like the importance of sleep, which I think is great, because even if you don't have a medical condition like I do, you still like there's a lot of stuff that is a lot harder because you're not giving your body the chance to do it at its full capacity. And so I'm excited to dive into this one. Hopefully you are too.
I'm nervous because I know I don't I don't give myself the sleep I should. Like I'm usually asleep by 9:45, 10 o'clock at night and up at 5, if not a little before. So, and I know that for me, that's not quite enough sleep just based on how I feel, but I kind of insist on doing it that way. So I'm a little nervous about this one. Just going to say it. Following the Sleep Revolution becomes my choice, and it is Out of Our Minds by Ken Robinson. Ken Robinson, here's another TED Talk guy for you. He's big on education for kids and how the public school system, I guess his claim to fame is that the public school system tends to drive creativity out of kids. And he's trying to find ways to revolutionize the school system to bring it back. So that's kind of his claim to fame, I guess. And he wrote this book, Out of Our Minds, which I think follows that thread, and I'm interested in reading it, so I'm going to drag you along with me.
Nice. It's only fair
Yeah,
after I make you learn about sleep.
See, there you go. I get you there. What are you reading in between there, Mike?
I have a book that has been on my shelf for a while, which I've actually started, called Steal the Show by Michael Port. Michael Port is a guy who basically the essence of the book is how to become a better public speaker. I've mentioned on this podcast before that I've joined Toastmasters. And in fact, as we record this, I just got done with a competition for Toastmasters. I joined the international competition, made it past the first round, and then took third place in the second round, where the only first place actually went on to like the regional thing. So I want to continue to get better at public speaking. And so this book was recommended to me as kind of the book in that particular space. So I'm really looking at this one, not for like life-changing mindset stuff like we would typically do on Bookworm, but more practical tips, little things that I can do, which would make what I do in terms of public speaking even better.
Nice. Well, I'm not going as serious. I'm reading The Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Mostly just for fun, but it's, what would you call it, Mike? You've read this probably. Fiction, but definite threads of religious truth, I guess, is what I'd call it. It's about it's essentially about demons and how they connive to convince humans to do what they want. So that's probably
it's a fictional story, applying a lot of principles from the Christian belief system to why things work the way that they do. So I don't know what the literary term for that is. An allegory, maybe?
Possibly. It's interesting. I've read parts of it before, never the whole thing, and I intend to read the whole thing. So there you go.
Nice. So if you want to recommend a book, you can do that on the Bookworm website. You can go to bookworm.fm/list. And you can see a list of all of the books that we have read, along with links to them, a list of the books that are planned, a list of the books that are recommended. And on the right-hand side, left-hand side, there's a big button where you can recommend a book. So if you want to add to the list, that would be great. We've done a couple of recommendations, and they've been great. Some other ones on the list of recommended, which we're going to add at some point soon. Anti-Fragile, that's one that I've been wanting to read for a long time. Sapiens is on here. Classics like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So if you have a book that you want to see us read, The 3 Big Questions for a Frantic Family. I think my wife probably added that one.
No comment.
But yeah, we want your feedback, and we want to know what you want us to cover. So please go check out that list. And if you have any that you want to see us cover on Bookworm, please recommend them.
And if you have any feedback you want to leave for us, there's a few ways you can do that. One is similar to what Justice did that we went through earlier on, is if you can go to bookworm.fm and there's a contact link there. If you go into that contact link, you can fill out that form and it'll send an email to myself, and I'll pass it on to Mike from there if it's worth that. So make it good. Another way is with an iTunes review. You can go out, leave a simple rating, leave us a comment there as well. Those help a lot to help other people find the show. And then the third way is if you want to leave some comments and just have a conversation about it, you can go to productivityguild.com. That's rebranding, Mike, of the discussion site I was running. So I recently rebranded that, and I get each of these episodes posted on that as a new topic, so people can have conversations on them there as well.
Nice. So thanks, everyone, for listening. If you're following along at home, the next book on the list is The Sleep Revolution by Arianna Huffington, and we will talk to you next time.